Democrats clearly are hoping that Obama gets elected and that they will be able to work out some things. I would expect this one to be fairly draconian, which means sort of a current policy, maybe a couple percent increase, because I don't think either side, the president or the Democrats in Congress, want to be perceived as sort of big spenders. So I suspect that when they work out agreement, it's going to be fairly clean. It may well be to March, but it will not be huge expansions. So what will happen then is that the next president will come in January, and then probably by late February, early March, they will do a so-called budget amendment, addendum. They'll send up another budget to the president. Generally what happens is that they accept 80 or 90%, particularly on the smaller programs, but the other 10 or 15 is where they focus in terms of beginning to shift priorities. What would we see? I think that under both an Obama and a McCain, we would probably begin to see growth in energy, R&D, in those particular programs. I think other than that, my suspicion is that McCain will be fairly restrictive, particularly on programs. I would suspect that Obama will begin to try to expand some of the low-income programs, so food stamps, WIC, and that, and education programs would be part of it. I would have to say that it is interesting if you trace history about when we've had tight budget times and when we've had periods where spending has been up. You'll find that one party control, whether it's Republican or Democrat, is pretty even, tends to not worry about the budget as much. So if you have an Obama with a continuing Democratic-dominated Congress, the odds are you may get more spending, particularly in the domestic discretionary area. As I said, we've done some analysis. You trace it back 30 years, and you can even see, although Republicans always argue they're the most disciplined, you notice in the last 4 to 6 years they have not been particularly disciplined. So again, it goes back to the rule of one party, a lot less concerned about the budget and deficit. When you got split government, they begin to compete for that. So under a split McCain presidency, I would argue we have much more restrictive types of spending. The other thing on McCain, all of the accounts that go through the appropriations committee, in other words, everything that's on entitlement, of course, includes defense appropriations and the non-defense portion. And I would expect that under McCain, I would expect to see erosion on the domestic discretionary portion as more of those funds, in fact, would go to the defense side of the equation. So that's another adjustment that we would probably see. The other area that I think probably both could support, and that's in the whole infrastructure area. I'm getting the sense that people who are speaking out on infrastructure, in fact, are beginning to build a case. In fact, the administration in the last couple of days, who fought against any additional funding in highways, has now come up after threatening a veto to support an $8 billion increase in highway money this year. So that's the other area where I think we might see some agreements. Now, what about mandates, preemptions, and so on? Again, if you go back over the last 10 or 12 years and look at preemptions and you look at mandates, what you'll find on balance is that Republicans tend to preempt states more, particularly with respect to revenues. So it's a nice deal for them because they basically get a tax cut, often for the private sector, but they don't pay the cost of it because they don't lose revenues. I would argue that Senator McCain has a fairly good track record. We fought with him quite a bit with respect to taxes on the internet. He was one of the leaders on the charge there. He's been one of the leaders on the so-called business activity tax to be more restrictive states with foreign profits taxes and so on. So I think McCain, you will see more preemption of state authority, particularly on the revenue side. Under the Obamas, I think what you'll see is mandates, particularly for low-income programs, with state money. I would argue neither party has been particularly good around the mandate issue over the last 4 or 5 years. The so-called Real ID, which was primarily a Republican one, is going to cost states probably $5 to $10 billion over the next several years. That very, very big, difficult mandate. By the same token, Democratic friends within the latest bill that was enacted on higher education has a maintenance of effort requirement, which basically says you cannot cut your higher education money below what it was the preceding year. That's about 11% of state budgets. So what they're doing is reducing the flexibility of states there. So what I would expect under Obama would be more mandates, particularly, for example, in Medicaid, other entitlement areas, or other areas, because with that size of the deficit, $650 billion, they're going to be looking around for money, and they're going to be happy to use somebody else's money, which may mean yours or mine. So that, I think, is a risk. Now, what about the major legislative initiatives? First one, I think that clearly one of the top priorities for Senator McCain is in the energy area. That would probably be more spending across the board. Energy technology probably would include conservation and some of the other areas. That is an area that potentially there could be additional funding for state grants. I also think that's an area that's fairly high priority for Senator Obama as well. So that's the possibility, I think, in terms of energy. Now, the negative side of all of this, and I would argue that it goes back to the preemption, I would expect the McCain to do more preemption on the citing of issues with respect to energy establishments, regardless of where the states are. I would think that many states have their individual portfolio standards around utilities and so on. I could see McCain basically saying we're going to do a national number and preempting states' ability to even have tighter. I would expect that Obama would probably do a floor as opposed to a ceiling on that to maintain some flexibility for states in terms of the preemption on energy. On the whole issue of climate change and so-called cap and trade, I will argue that this is an area that we don't know a lot about. If you look at the last bill, clearly there was about an additional $1 trillion moving around over the next 5 years. So if it comes to pass that we are really doing cap and trade, then the potential impacts on states is in fact huge. Under some of the bills, a lot of the funds actually go back to the private sector due to employment disruptions. And some of the other bills, a lot of the money in fact comes to states to take care of that. And what I'm talking about is hundreds of billions of dollars under a cap and trade type of thing. So the first question is, clearly McCain has backed away a fair amount from that, so it's a little bit unclear. Clearly the Democrats in Congress want to move forward on that. Obama seems to be more supportive of it, but all I can say is there's huge unknowns around cap and trade. We do know that because of the so-called taxes and the auctioning of the ability to pollute is going to be a lot of money, and how it's allocated back is going to be very, very significant. And some bills very much provide funding to states, others really very little to states. So